In the sprawling, glittering tapestry of the modern world, there exist figures who seem to have conquered it. They are the titans of industry, the architects of our digital age, the individuals whose wealth is so vast it becomes an abstraction, a string of numbers that has lost all connection to the paper and coin from which it was born. They live in penthouses that pierce the clouds, command armies of employees with a single email, and shape the very fabric of our daily lives. We look upon them with a mixture of awe, envy, and sometimes, resentment. We imagine a life free from the mundane worries that occupy our own, the rent, the bills, the grinding necessity of a 9-to-5. We imagine a life of ultimate freedom. But freedom, like any landscape, has its own topography. There is the freedom to do, and there is the freedom from. The ultra-wealthy have mastered the first. They can buy any object, travel to any destination, and fund any venture. But they often find themselves trapped by the second. They are not free from expectation, from pressure, from the crushing weight of their own success. They are not free from the most human of all prisons, the one built inside their own minds. This is a story about one such man. A man who had, by every conceivable metric, won the game of life. He had everything. And yet, he had nothing. This is the story of Julian Croft, and how his meticulously constructed world of sterile perfection was irrevocably, beautifully, and deliciously shattered. It is a story that reminds us that true wealth is not measured in stock portfolios, but in shared moments, not in acquisitions, but in connections. It begins, as it so often does for men like Julian, at the very top, in a gilded cage with an unparalleled view of a world he owned but could no longer touch. Welcome back to CJ Stories, where we bring you emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul. If you're just joining us for the first time, you're welcome to this wonderful big family. We're so glad to have you here. Please make sure to watch till the end, and if today's story moves you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this video with your family and loved ones. Now, let's dive into today's story. ACT-1, The Gilded Cage. Julian Croft existed in a state of perpetual, high-altitude silence. His penthouse, occupying the top 3 floors of the newly christened Croft Tower, was less a home and more a monument to sterile achievement. The floor-to-ceiling windows, a seamless sheet of triple-paned, UV-filtered glass, presented the city of New York not as a living, breathing entity, but as a silent, glittering circuit board. From this vantage point, 78 stories above the fray, the blaring taxi horns, the distant sirens, and the collective murmur of 8 million souls were rendered into a faint, almost imperceptible thrum. It was the sound of a machine he had built, a system he had mastered, and it brought him no comfort whatsoever. His morning routine was a testament to efficiency. No jarring alarm clock disturbed his sleep. Instead, the blackout shades would retract with a whisper quiet were at precisely 5 a.m., and the ambient lighting system would slowly mimic the dawn, a scientifically calibrated spectrum of light designed to optimize his circadian rhythm. He would rise, his lean frame already clad in bespoke athletic wear laid out by his household manager the night before, and move to his private gym. The gym was not a place of sweat and grit, it was a laboratory. Biometric sensors in the floor, the treadmill, and the weights tracked his every movement, his heart rate, his oxygen saturation, his power output. The data streamed in real time to a tablet mounted at eye level, displaying graphs and percentages. He was not working out, he was optimizing the human machine. After the precisely calibrated 45-minute session, he would stand under a shower that adjusted its temperature and pressure based on his skin temperature and muscle fatigue. Breakfast was not cooked, it was formulated. A nutrient-dense, pale green smoothie waited for him in a chilled glass. It contained kale, spinach, spirulina, protein isolate, and a cocktail of nootropics designed to enhance cognitive function. It had no discernible flavor beyond a vague, earthy bitterness, but flavor was an inefficient variable. It was fuel. His work life was an extension of this same ruthless optimization. By 6:30 a.m., he was in his home office, a space that made the rest of the penthouse look cozy. A single slab of obsidian served as his desk, upon which sat 3 glowing monitors. Here, Julian was not a man, but a nexus. He was the central processing unit for Croft Industries, a sprawling global conglomerate with interests in AI development, logistics, and private space exploration. His days were partitioned into 5-minute blocks. Meetings were teleconferenced to eliminate travel time. Memos were read by an AI assistant that provided him with bullet point summaries. Human interaction was a necessary, but often frustrating, bottleneck. He was brilliant. No one denied this. He could see patterns in market data that others missed, connecting disparate threads of information to predict trends with uncanny accuracy. He had built his empire from a single algorithm he'd written in his dorm room 2 decades ago. He was driven, relentless, and utterly uncompromising. In the boardroom, he was a force of nature, calm, precise, and lethal. He could dismantle a flawed proposal with a few quiet questions, his gray eyes missing nothing. His employees respected him, feared him, but no one could say they knew him. He was a concept, a legend, the ghost in his own machine. But in the quiet moments, the unscheduled gaps that his assistant, Mark, tried so desperately to eliminate, a different reality would bleed through the cracks of his perfect facade. It was a profound, hollow ache. An existential loneliness that no acquisition could fill. He had purchased a private island in the Caribbean, a vineyard in Tuscany, a collection of modern art that could fill a small museum. These things were assets, listed on a spreadsheet, their value fluctuating with the market. They brought him no joy. They were just more things to manage. One Tuesday evening, the hollowness was particularly acute. He had just concluded a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm. It was a masterstroke of corporate warfare, a victory that would be celebrated on the front pages of financial journals worldwide. He had won. He stood before the vast window in his living area, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. A glass of impossibly rare scotch sat untouched on a nearby table. He felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just the cold, smooth glass of the window against his fingertips and the silent hum of the building's climate control. He was surrounded by the best of everything, and all of it was soulless. The Italian leather sofa was chosen by an interior designer for its aesthetic value, not its comfort. The art on the walls was chosen by a consultant for its investment potential, not its beauty. The food in his state-of-the-art kitchen was prepared by a private chef according to the strict guidelines of a nutritionist. It was all a performance of luxury, a life curated by others for an audience of no one. An unfamiliar impulse seized him. It was an urge for something else. Something real. Something inefficient and flawed and unpredictable. He turned from the window, ignoring the untouched scotch, and walked towards the private elevator. "Mark," he said, speaking to the air. His AI assistant, integrated into the penthouse, responded instantly, its voice a calm, synthesized female tone. "Yes, Julian? Cancel my 8 p.m. analytics review." There was a fractional pause. "Of course. May I ask the reason? Shall I reschedule?" "No reason. Just cancel it." "Very well. Your schedule is clear until your 9 a.m. call with the Tokyo board tomorrow." He stepped into the elevator, a mirrored cube that descended silently through the heart of his private domain. He bypassed the garage level, with its fleet of silent electric supercars, and pressed the button for the ground floor. The lobby. A place he hadn't set foot in for months. He always used the private underground entrance. The elevator doors opened to the soaring, marble-clad main lobby. The evening security staff, accustomed to seeing him only as a fleeting image on a security monitor, stiffened in surprise. He gave them a curt nod, his face an unreadable mask, and pushed through the heavy glass doors out onto the street. The city hit him like a physical blow. The sudden cacophony of sounds, the impatient honk of a cab, the distant wail of a siren, the overlapping chatter of passers-by, the rhythmic thump of music from a nearby bar, was an assault on his curated silence. The air, thick with the smells of street vendor hot dogs, exhaust fumes, and the faint, sweet scent of rain on hot pavement, was a world away from the filtered, purified air of his penthouse. He had no destination. He just walked. His $1,000, custom-made shoes felt alien on the cracked, uneven sidewalk. People flowed around him, a river of humanity, their faces a kaleidoscope of emotions, laughter, worry, exhaustion, joy. They were all living lives of messy, complicated reality. He felt like a foreigner, a ghost observing a world he no longer belonged to. He walked for nearly an hour, his path aimless. He found himself in a neighborhood that was a relic of an older New York, a place of brick-faced tenement buildings and storefronts that had been there for generations. It was here, on a quiet, tree-lined side street, that a smell stopped him in his tracks. It was not a complex smell. It was simple, elemental. Garlic and olive oil sizzling in a pan. The rich, acidic sweetness of simmering tomatoes. The unmistakable, life-affirming aroma of baking bread. It was a smell that bypassed his intellect and hit him somewhere deeper, somewhere primal. It was the smell of food not as fuel, but as love. His eyes followed the scent to its source, a small, unassuming restaurant on the corner. The sign above the door was simple, hand-painted wood, Trattoria Rossi. Through the large front window, he could see a scene of chaotic warmth. The room was small, packed with mismatched wooden tables and chairs. The lighting was low and golden. Families were talking, couples were laughing, wine glasses were clinking. It was a world of vibrant, inefficient, human connection. And at the center of it all, visible for a moment as she moved from the kitchen to the dining room, was a woman. She had dark, curly hair tied back in a messy bun, a smudge of flour on her cheek, and she was wearing a simple white apron over a green dress. She placed a steaming platter of what looked like lasagna on a table and then laughed at something one of the patrons said. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a full-bodied, unself-conscious expression of pure joy. But it was her smile that truly captured him. It wasn't a polite, practiced smile like the ones he saw in boardrooms. It was genuine, radiating a warmth that seemed to push back against the city's evening chill. It was a smile that didn't ask for anything, that wasn't part of a transaction. It simply was. Julian stood on the sidewalk, a billionaire in a bespoke suit, utterly transfixed by the sight of a woman with flour on her cheek in a tiny, crowded restaurant. In that moment, the complex algorithms of his life simplified into a single, binary choice. He could turn around, walk back to his silent tower, and resume his life of optimized emptiness. Or, he could open the door. For the first time in a very long time, Julian Croft made a decision that was not based on data, not driven by logic, and not aimed at any discernible goal. He reached out, his hand feeling strangely heavy, and pushed open the door to the Trattoria Rossi. A small bell chimed, announcing his arrival, and the wall of warm, garlicky air enveloped him completely. He had stepped out of his cage and into a world he didn't understand, and for the first time in a decade, he felt a flicker of something other than emptiness. He felt curiosity. Question for Act 1. If you had all the resources in the world, what single, non-material thing would you seek out to find genuine contentment? Act 2. A glimmer of something real. Stepping inside the Trattoria Rossi was like stepping into a different decade. The air was thick with conversations that overlapped and intertwined, a symphony of human connection played against the clatter of cutlery and the distant sizzle of the kitchen. Julian stood just inside the doorway, a stark, gray figure in a sea of color and warmth. He was accustomed to commanding any room he entered. Here, he felt profoundly out of place, an anomaly in the ecosystem. The woman with the radiant smile, the one with the flower on her cheek, was now bustling behind a small, cluttered counter. She looked up, and her eyes met his. He saw a flicker of professional appraisal, a new customer, a table for one, but there was no recognition, no sign that she knew he was the man whose face occasionally graced the covers of business magazines. To her, he was just a man in a suit standing awkwardly in her doorway. "Just one?" she asked, her voice as warm as the room itself. It carried a slight, melodic accent he couldn't quite place. Julian, a man who could command a room of 1,000 investors, found himself momentarily unable to speak. He simply nodded. "All right, I can squeeze you in at the corner table over there," she said, gesturing with a menu. "It's a little tight, but it's all I've got right now." He navigated the narrow space between tables, murmuring apologies as he bumped a chair. He slid into the small table in the corner, feeling impossibly large and conspicuous. The chair was wood, slightly wobbly. The table was covered in a red and white checkered tablecloth that had seen better days. It was the antithesis of everything in his life. It was real. The woman arrived with a glass of water and the menu. "I'm Elena, by the way," she said, her smile returning, just as genuine up close. "Let me know when you're ready." He looked down at the menu. It was a single laminated page, the text simple and direct. Nana's lasagna. Papa's polpette. Zia's tiramisu. Everything was possessive, everything belonged to someone, a lineage of recipes passed down through hands and hearts. It was a world away from the molecular gastronomy and nutrient pastes he was used to. When Elena returned, he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked for a recommendation. "What's good?" The question felt clumsy on his tongue. Elena chuckled, a soft, easy sound. "Everything is good. It's my family's food. But Nana's lasagna, it's the reason this place exists. My grandmother, she came from Sicily. She used to say this recipe holds the memory of the sun." The memory of the sun. The phrase was so poetic, so utterly inefficient, that it intrigued him. "I'll have that," he said. "Good choice," she said, and with another one of those disarming smiles, she was gone, swallowed back into the happy chaos of the restaurant. Julian sat in the corner, an observer. He watched Elena move through the room. She was the heart of the trattoria, pumping life into every corner. She refilled a wine glass here, laughed with a table of regulars there, gently wiped a smudge of sauce from a child's face. She moved with a purpose that was entirely different from his own. His purpose was to acquire, to grow, to dominate. Hers was to nurture, to connect, to serve. The lasagna arrived on a heavy ceramic plate. It wasn't a neat, architectural stack like something a high-end chef would create. It was a generous, slightly messy square, the cheese on top blistered and golden brown, a little bit of rich red sauce spilling onto the plate. The steam that rose from it carried that same elemental scent of tomato, basil, and something else, something rich and savory he couldn't name. He took a bite. And everything stopped. The silence that fell was not the sterile silence of his penthouse. It was an internal silence, a moment of pure, unadulterated sensation. The taste was overwhelming. It was not just a combination of ingredients. It was a story. The sweetness of the tomatoes, the creaminess of the bechamel, the rich depth of the slow-cooked meat sauce, the perfectly cooked pasta, it all came together in a wave of flavor that was both complex and profoundly simple. He tasted the sun that Elena had spoken of. He tasted care. He tasted time. He ate the entire plate, not with the detached efficiency of consuming fuel, but with a slow, deliberate focus. Each bite was a discovery. He, a man who could deconstruct the financial intricacies of a multinational corporation, was completely captivated by a plate of baked pasta. He finished his meal and found himself reluctant to leave. He didn't want to return to the cold, silent tower. He wanted to stay in this bubble of warmth and noise and life. He ordered a coffee, just for an excuse to linger. When Elena brought the bill, she paused. "You really like the lasagna, huh? Your plate is spotless." It was. He searched for a word, but excellent or superb felt too clinical. "It was the best I've ever had." She beamed, and her smile seemed to light up the small corner he occupied. "Nana would be happy to hear that. She's in the kitchen, still yelling at my uncle to stir the sauce." This piece of information, that the mythical Nana was a real, tangible person in the next room, grounded the experience even further. He paid with a credit card, a black, metallic thing with no spending limit. Elena took it, swiped it through her old-fashioned machine, and handed it back without a second glance at the name. He was anonymous, and the feeling was intoxicating. He left the trattoria and walked back into the night. The city no longer felt like a hostile assault. It felt different. More vibrant. He could hear the individual conversations of people passing by, see the expressions on their faces. It was as if that single meal had recalibrated his senses, tuning them back into the frequency of human life. The next night, he returned. And the night after that. It became his ritual. At 7:30 p.m., he would leave his tower, walk the 27 blocks, and take his seat at the small corner table, which Elena now saved for him without being asked. He worked his way through the menu. He had the polpette, impossibly tender meatballs in a sauce that tasted of generations. He had the gnocchi al pesto, light, pillowy dumplings in a vibrant, nutty sauce. Each dish was a revelation. But it was more than just the food. It was Elena. Their conversation started small. She would ask him about his day, and he would give vague, truncated answers. It was busy, he'd say. Productive. She, in turn, would offer small vignettes from her own life. A funny story about a supplier who tried to sell her subpar tomatoes. A worry about her younger brother's college applications. A proud moment when her Nana Maria finally taught her the secret to getting the bechamel just right. Julian found himself listening with an intensity he usually reserved for stock market analysis. Her world was so small, so contained compared to his own global empire, and yet it felt infinitely richer. It was a world of tangible things, the texture of dough, the color of fresh basil, the weight of a busy day on your feet, the warmth of a shared laugh. His own world, he was beginning to realize, was one of abstractions. Market caps, user engagement metrics, synergistic opportunities, shareholder value. He dealt in numbers and concepts, not things you could touch or taste or smell. One evening, about 2 weeks into his nightly pilgrimage, he arrived to find the trattoria unusually quiet. Elena was at the counter, her brow furrowed as she looked over a stack of papers. The usual light in her eyes was dimmed. "Everything all right?" he asked, taking his seat. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's the landlord. He's selling the building. The new owners, they want to triple the rent. They sent the official notice today." She gestured to the papers. "There's no way we can afford it. We have 60 days to figure something out. Or to close." The thought of the Trattoria Rossi closing, of this small beacon of warmth being extinguished, sent a strange and unfamiliar pang through Julian's chest. It was a protective instinct. "We've been here for 40 years, she said, her voice soft. "My grandfather built that bar with his own hands. This place, it's all my family has. It's our history." Julian's mind, the powerful, problem-solving machine that had built an empire, immediately kicked into gear. This was a problem, and he was the world's foremost solver of problems. Tripling the rent? It was a rounding error in his personal finances. Buying the building? A simple transaction. He could solve this for her. In a heartbeat. He opened his mouth to say so. To tell her not to worry, that he could handle it. That he could write a check and make this entire problem disappear. But he stopped. He looked at her face, at the genuine worry etched there, and something held him back. It was a nascent, fragile understanding. Her world operated on a different currency. Throwing money at this problem felt like a violation, like using a sledgehammer to fix a delicate watch. It would solve the problem, yes, but it would change the dynamic between them forever. He would no longer be Julian, the quiet man in the corner. He would become Julian Croft, the billionaire benefactor. The power balance would shift irrevocably, and the genuine, simple connection he was beginning to feel would be tainted by obligation and disparity. So, instead of offering to buy the building, he said something else. "I'm sorry, Elena. That's terrible." She gave him a weak, grateful smile. "Yeah, it is. But, we're fighters. The Rossi family. We'll figure something out." She squared her shoulders, a flicker of her usual resilience returning. "Now, are you going to have the lasagna, or are you brave enough to try my uncle's cacciatore tonight?" He chose the cacciatore, but his mind was elsewhere. He was wrestling with a new kind of problem. A problem that couldn't be solved with an algorithm or a bank transfer. For the first time, he was forced to consider not just the what of a solution, but the how. He was beginning to learn that in Elena's world, the process mattered just as much as the outcome. The act of fighting for something, of struggling together as a family, had a value that his money could not purchase. And he, a man who could move markets with a whisper, felt utterly powerless and, strangely, humbled. This small, wobbly table in the corner of a failing restaurant had become the most important classroom in the world. Question for Act 2. What role does food and shared meals play in your own life and relationships? Is it merely sustenance, or something more? ACT 3, The Collision of Worlds. The 60-day clock was ticking. For Elena and her family, it was a countdown to potential ruin. For Julian, it became a crucible for his changing perspective. He continued his nightly visits, but the atmosphere in the trattoria had shifted. The joyous chaos was now underpinned by a current of anxiety. He would see Elena in hushed, worried conversations with her nana, Maria, or her uncle, a burly man named Leo who ran the kitchen with a loud but loving iron fist. Julian, meanwhile, was fighting a war on two fronts. During the day, he was the titan of industry, navigating the complex architecture of his empire. He would sit in his silent office, making decisions that affected thousands of lives and billions of dollars, all while a part of his mind remained in the warm, garlic-scented world of the Trattoria Rossi. The dichotomy was becoming unbearable. The problems of his corporate world, which had once seemed paramount, now felt sterile and meaningless compared to the very real, very human struggle of the Rossi family. He couldn't stand the inaction. His entire life had been predicated on identifying problems and executing solutions with maximum efficiency. Watching Elena worry, seeing the stress lines deepen around her eyes, felt like a personal failure. The impulse he had suppressed weeks earlier, the urge to simply solve the problem with his immense wealth, returned with a vengeance. His logic screamed at him, "This is absurd. You have the resources. It's like watching someone drown when you have a lifeboat." He finally broke. One evening, about a month after the notice had arrived, he asked Elena to sit with him after the restaurant had emptied out. The last of the staff had gone home, leaving just the two of them in the quiet, dimly lit room. The ghosts of the evening's laughter and conversation still hung in the air. "Elena," he began, his voice more formal than he intended. "We need to talk about the restaurant." She sighed, sinking into the chair opposite him. "Julian, there's nothing to talk about. We've been to the banks. Without a massive down payment for a new lease, no one will give us a loan. We're looking at other locations, but everything is so expensive." "I can help," he said, the words finally tumbling out. She looked at him, her expression cautious. "That's kind of you, but unless you know a landlord who has a soft spot for old Sicilian recipes, I'm not sure what you can do." This was his moment. The logical, efficient, problem-solving Julian Croft took over. He leaned forward, his tone shifting to the one he used in boardrooms, calm, authoritative, and utterly confident. "I'm not talking about knowing a landlord, Elena. I'm talking about solving this. Permanently. I want to buy this building for you." Elena stared at him, her face blank with shock. "You, what?" "I'll buy the building," he repeated, gaining momentum. "The deed will be in your family's name. The problem is gone. But that's just the start. This place, this food, it's an incredible product. Nana's Lasagna is a brand. We can scale this. I can provide the capital to open a second location, a third. We can franchise. We'll streamline the kitchen operations, centralize the sourcing of ingredients for consistency, create a training program. We can put a Trattoria Rossi in every major city. Your family would be set for generations. You would never have to worry about money, or landlords, or anything, ever again." He finished his proposal and sat back, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had laid out a perfect, elegant solution. He hadn't just saved the restaurant, he had given her an empire. He had offered her a piece of his world, the greatest gift he knew how to give, success, on a massive scale. He waited for her expression of stunned gratitude. He waited for tears of joy. He waited for her to thank him for changing her life. Instead, he was met with a chilling silence. Elena's face, which had been pale with shock, was now slowly suffusing with a deep, crimson flush. The warmth in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a fire of a very different kind. It was the fire of betrayal. "You don't get it," she said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "After all this time, sitting here every night, you still don't get it at all." Julian was baffled. "Get what?" "I'm offering you everything. A solution." "A solution?" She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You think this is a business that needs to be scaled? You think my Nana's lasagna is a product? This isn't Croft Industries, Julian. This is my home." Her voice rose, filled with a pain that stunned him into silence. "Do you think I do this for the money? I do this because my grandfather laid these floors. I do this because my uncle sings opera, badly, when he's stirring the sauce. I do this because Mrs. Gable from down the street has been eating at this exact table every Tuesday for 20 years since her husband died, and this is the only place she doesn't feel lonely. You don't franchise that. You don't streamline my Nana's hands, the ones that show me how much love to knead into the dough. You can't put that on a spreadsheet." Tears were welling in her eyes, tears of anger and hurt. "You come in here with your money and your big ideas, and you think you can just buy my life and turn it into another one of your assets. You're not helping, Julian. You're trying to consume it. You're trying to turn the one real thing you've found into the same empty, hollow thing that you're trying to escape from." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I thought you were different. I thought you saw what this place was. But you just see another opportunity. Another investment." She looked at him, her gaze now cold and distant. "I think you should go. And I don't think you should come back." With that, she turned and walked into the darkness of the kitchen, leaving Julian alone at the table in the center of the silent room. The words she had spoken echoed around him, each one a hammer blow against the fragile foundation of the new world he thought he had been building. "You're trying to turn the one real thing you found into the same empty, hollow thing you're trying to escape from." He had never felt so utterly, profoundly wrong. He had offered her the keys to the kingdom, and in her eyes, he had handed her a set of chains. His grand gesture, the ultimate expression of his power and care, had been a monumental act of desecration. He stood up, his body feeling heavy and old, and walked out of the trattoria. The bell on the door chimed, a lonely, mocking sound in the night. He didn't walk back to his penthouse. He just stood on the sidewalk, the city lights blurring through the unfamiliar sting of tears in his own eyes. The next day, a genuine crisis erupted at his company. A rival conglomerate, sensing a shift in his focus, had launched an aggressive, meticulously planned hostile takeover bid. It was a direct assault on his life's work. The old Julian Croft was needed. He threw himself into the fight with a savagery that shocked even his closest advisors. For 72 hours, he barely slept. He lived in the war room of his office, fueled by black coffee and the cold fire of rage. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly dominant. He anticipated their every move, countered every strategy, and exploited every weakness. He was a master predator in his natural habitat. On the third day, he won. The takeover was defeated, his company secured, his empire intact. His board was ecstatic. The financial news outlets hailed his genius once again. He stood in his office, looking at the stock ticker that confirmed his victory, the numbers glowing green. And he felt the same soul-crushing emptiness he had felt after his last big victory. But this time, it was worse. Because now he knew what the alternative felt like. He knew the warmth of Elena's smile, the taste of her Nana's cooking, the sound of laughter in a crowded room. His victory felt like ash in his mouth. He had successfully defended his gilded cage, only to realize, with horrifying clarity, that it was still just a cage. He had won the battle for his company, but he had lost the only thing that had started to matter. He had collided two worlds, and in the explosion, he had destroyed the one he was desperately beginning to need. Question for Act 3, when showing care or appreciation, is it more important to give what you think is valuable, or to understand what the other person truly values? ACT 4, Deconstruction and Rebuilding. The hollow victory at work served as a brutal, clarifying mirror for Julian. He had proven, once again, that he was the king of his abstract kingdom of numbers and strategies. But Elena's words haunted him, playing on a loop in the silence of his penthouse. "You don't get it. You just see another opportunity." She was right. He had approached her life, her legacy, with the same transactional mindset he used for a corporate acquisition. He had tried to apply his formula for success to something that was never about success in his terms. It was about significance. The days that followed were a kind of limbo. He stopped going to the trattoria. The walk he had once taken with anticipation he now avoided, the route feeling like a path through a personal wasteland. He tried to fill the void with work, but the fire was gone. The intricate dance of global finance now seemed like a foolish, pointless game. The ache of loneliness had returned, but it was sharper now, defined by a specific absence. It was the absence of a warm smile, of shared stories, of food made with love. It was the absence of Elena. He realized that an apology was necessary. But a simple, "I'm sorry," felt insultingly inadequate. His error was not a slip of the tongue, it was a fundamental flaw in his perspective. To apologize, he first had to change. The apology couldn't be another transaction, an exchange of his regret for her forgiveness. It had to be an offering. It had to be proof that he had finally started to understand. His first step was research, but of a different kind. He didn't look at market data. He went to the New York Public Library, a place he hadn't visited since he was a student, and read about the history of Italian immigration in the city. He read about the role of food in Sicilian culture, about family, tradition, and the small, neighborhood businesses that formed the backbone of communities. He was trying to learn the language of her world, not to master it, but to respect it. Then, he did something even more radical. He walked into his own state-of-the-art, surgically clean kitchen, a room he had only ever passed through. He dismissed his private chef for the week, much to the man's confusion. He stood alone in the vast, metallic space, surrounded by appliances that cost more than most cars. He was going to try to cook. He decided to make a simple tomato sauce. It was a disaster. He, a man who could pilot a complex algorithm through the chaos of the stock market, was completely humbled by a few cloves of garlic. He burned them, filling the penthouse with an acrid smoke that set off the hypersensitive smoke detectors, triggering a silent alarm at his security station. He used the wrong kind of tomatoes, creating a watery, acidic mess. His pristine kitchen was soon splattered with red, his bespoke shirt stained. It was inefficient, messy, and deeply frustrating. And yet, as he stood there, surrounded by his failure, he felt a flicker of something new. He was using his hands. He was engaging with real, tangible ingredients. He was creating, not just conceptualizing. In his clumsy, failed attempt, he gained a sliver of appreciation for the skill, the intuition, and the patience it took to create the food he had so casually enjoyed at the trattoria. He spent a week like this. He tried again and again. He learned to chop an onion without it turning to mush. He learned the smell of garlic just as it turns fragrant, right before it burns. He learned the deep satisfaction of watching a pot of sauce slowly thicken and darken, its aroma filling the sterile air of his home with something that felt like life. His sauces were still mediocre at best, a pale imitation of the Rossi families, but the process was changing him. He wasn't optimizing. He was learning. He was becoming human. Finally, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't just show up with a checkbook or a business plan. He had to show up with humility. One afternoon, he walked back to the familiar street. He didn't go at night, during the dinner rush. He went in the quiet lull of the mid-afternoon. He carried no briefcase. He wore a simple pair of trousers and a plain sweater, clothes that felt more honest. In his hands, he carried a small, lumpy, paper-wrapped parcel. He pushed open the door. The little bell chimed. Elena was at the bar, polishing glasses, her back to him. Her nana, Maria, a small, formidable woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, was sitting at a table, snapping green beans into a bowl. Elena tensed at the sound of the bell and turned. When she saw him, her face became a careful, neutral mask. The warmth was gone. "Julian," she said, her voice flat. "Elena," he began, his heart pounding in his chest. I came to apologize." He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. He didn't try to close the distance. He respected the boundary her coldness had created. "My apology isn't just words," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "My apology is that I finally understand. I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. What you have here, it isn't a business model. It's a legacy. It's love, in a form you can taste. And I tried to treat it like an asset on a balance sheet. I was arrogant, and I was blind. And I am so sorry for the disrespect I showed you, and your family, and this place." He looked over at her grandmother, who had stopped snapping beans and was watching him intently. He gave her a respectful nod. "And to you, Mrs. Rossi. I am sorry for disrespecting your life's work." Maria just watched him, her expression unreadable. Julian placed the clumsy parcel on the bar. "This is, well, it's stupid, I know. But I wanted to. I don't know." Elena looked at the package, then back at him, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She slowly unwrapped the paper. Inside was a loaf of bread. It was misshapen, a little too dark on one side, and clearly the work of an amateur. I tried to bake it myself, Julian said, a flush of embarrassment rising on his neck. To understand. It took me 4 tries. It's probably terrible. But I wanted to offer you something I had made, not something I had bought. A long silence filled the room. Elena stared at the lumpy loaf of bread. She looked up at Julian, at his earnest, nervous face, at the faint dusting of flour he'd missed near his hairline. And for the first time in weeks, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. She broke off a small piece of the bread and tasted it. She chewed thoughtfully. "It's a little dense," she said, her voice softer now. "And you used a little too much salt." She broke off another piece and handed it to her nana. Maria took it, examined it, and then tasted it. She chewed for a long moment, her dark eyes fixed on Julian. Then, she spoke, her voice thick with a Sicilian accent. "It's not good bread," she declared. Julian's heart sank. "But," Maria continued, a twinkle in her eye, "it isn't honest bread." She looked at her granddaughter. "Give the boy an apron. He can start by washing the dishes." The tension in the room shattered. Elena let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She looked at Julian, and the warmth was back in her eyes, tentative but real. "The dishwasher is in the back," she said. "And don't break anything." That afternoon, Julian Croft, a man whose net worth was greater than the GDP of several small countries, stood in the hot, steamy kitchen of the Trattoria Rossi, his sleeves rolled up, his hands plunged into a sink of soapy water. He scrubbed pots and pans, the clatter a joyful noise. Uncle Leo clapped him on the back, leaving a greasy handprint, and sang a booming, off-key aria from La Boheme. He was not a benefactor. He was not a customer. He was a dishwasher. And in that moment, scrubbing burnt-on cheese from a lasagna pan, he had never felt richer. He was deconstructing his old self and rebuilding something new, one clean plate at a time. The real work had just begun. Question for Act 4, think of a time you had to fundamentally change your approach to solve a problem in a relationship. What did it take to shift your perspective? ACT 5, a new recipe for life. The act of washing dishes was a baptism. The hot water and soap seemed to wash away not just the grease and grime, but the last vestiges of Julian's corporate armor. Over the following weeks, he became a fixture in the Trattoria's off-hours. He graduated from washing dishes to peeling potatoes, then to chopping vegetables. Uncle Leo, initially suspicious of the suit, began to mentor him with a gruff affection, showing him the proper way to hold a knife, the art of dicing an onion without weeping, a skill Julian had yet to master, and the sacred importance of using only San Marzano tomatoes for the sauce. He was a clumsy apprentice. His movements, so precise and economical in the boardroom, were awkward and inefficient in the kitchen. He was slow. He made messes. But he was dedicated. He listened more than he spoke. He learned the rhythms of the kitchen, the banter between Elena and her uncle, the quiet, commanding presence of Nana Maria, who would taste a simmering sauce and declare it needed just one more leaf of basil, with the certainty of a god. His relationship with Elena was rebuilding, slowly and carefully. They talked as they worked, their conversations weaving around the chopping of parsley and the stirring of risotto. He learned about her childhood, growing up in the apartment above the restaurant, the scent of garlic a constant companion. She learned about his, a lonely, driven childhood, pushed by demanding parents toward an academic excellence that left little room for play or connection. For the first time, she saw the boy inside the billionaire, the one who had learned to equate value with achievement. He didn't hide his wealth anymore, but it was no longer a tool or a weapon. It became just a fact, a part of his life as mundane as the color of his eyes. One afternoon, a frantic call came from his assistant, Mark, about a sudden currency fluctuation that required his immediate attention. Elena watched as Julian, his hands still covered in flour, calmly took the call, issued a series of quiet, complex instructions that stabilized a multi-billion-dollar fund, and then hung up. "Sorry about that," he said, turning back to the pasta dough they were kneading. "Where were we?" Elena just shook her head and smiled. The two worlds had not just collided, they were beginning to integrate. He was no longer just Julian Croft, the CEO, or Julian, the man in the corner. He was becoming one, whole person. The 60-day deadline for the rent increase was still approaching, a dark cloud on the horizon. But now, Julian approached the problem differently. He didn't offer to buy the building. Instead, he sat down with Elena, Leo, and Maria around one of the checkered tablecloths. "I have an idea," he said. "But it's just an idea. We decide together." He proposed creating a new legal entity, the Rossi Family Foundation. He would make a significant, anonymous donation to it, not as a loan, but as a gift to the city's cultural heritage. The foundation's first act would be to purchase the building. The trattoria would then pay a fair, manageable rent to the foundation. The excess income generated by the foundation would then be used to provide grants to other small, legacy businesses in the city facing similar threats from gentrification. He wasn't just saving the Trattoria Rossi. He was using his resources to protect its essence and to help others like it. He was scaling the principle, not the product. Nana Maria listened to the entire proposal, her sharp eyes never leaving his. When he was finished, she reached across the table and patted his hand. "This," she said simply, "is a good sauce." It was the highest praise she could offer. The plan was set in motion. Julian's legal team, bewildered but efficient, handled the anonymous donation and the creation of the foundation. The building was purchased. The Trattoria Rossi was safe. There was no grand announcement, no press release. The only celebration was a simple family meal in the closed restaurant, filled with more laughter and wine than Julian had ever experienced. His own life began to change in profound ways. He didn't abandon his company, but he began to run it differently. He promoted a new CEO to handle the day-to-day operations, a brilliant woman from within the company. He took on the title of chairman, focusing on long-term vision and, for the first time, corporate ethics. He started a new division within Croft Industries focused on sustainable, socially responsible investments. His board was skeptical at first, but Julian, imbued with a new, quieter confidence, was more persuasive than ever. He was no longer just chasing profit, he was chasing purpose. His penthouse, once a sterile monument to loneliness, began to transform. He had the stark, uncomfortable furniture replaced with pieces that were comfortable and inviting. He filled the space with plants. The biggest change was in the kitchen. It was no longer a pristine laboratory. It was used. There were smudges on the stainless steel, a collection of mismatched pots and pans, and a permanent scent of olive oil and herbs in the air. 6 months after he first walked into the Trattoria Rossi, Julian hosted a dinner party in his penthouse. The guest list was a strange and beautiful mix. On one side of the long wooden table were his old-world contacts, a few trusted board members, his sharp-witted assistant Mark, and a hedge fund manager who still couldn't quite understand what had happened to the old Julian. On the other side was his new world, Elena, her hand resting comfortably in his, Nana Maria, looking regal and slightly amused by the view, Uncle Leo, who had insisted on bringing a bottle of his homemade grappa, and even Mrs. Gable, the elderly regular, who had declared the elevator ride better than the one at the funfair. The food was not catered by a Michelin-starred chef. It was cooked by Julian and Elena, together, in his kitchen. They served a simple, perfect meal of fresh bread, handmade pasta with a rich, slow-simmered ragu, and a tiramisu made from Zia's recipe. As he stood at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in his hand, Julian looked at the scene before him. He saw the two halves of his life, not colliding, but merging, creating a new, vibrant whole. He saw laughter and conversation flowing easily between the billionaire and the baker, the CEO and the neighborhood widow. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, he and Elena stood on the balcony, looking out at the same view that had once seemed so cold and distant. The city below was no longer a silent circuit board. It was a living thing, a collection of a million little lights, each one a home, a story, a Trattoria Rossi of its own. He was still a billionaire. He still had the penthouse, the company, the resources. He still had everything he had before. But now, it was different. The everything was no longer the point. The wealth was not the end goal, but a tool that, when used with wisdom and heart, could create connection and preserve beauty. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. The silence between them was not empty. It was full. It was the comfortable, peaceful silence of two people who had found their way home. Julian Croft had started his journey with everything but happiness. Now, he understood. Happiness wasn't an acquisition to be made or a summit to be conquered. It was a recipe, passed down through generations. It required simple ingredients: connection, purpose, vulnerability, and love. It took time and patience to prepare. And it was best when shared. In the warmth of a smile and the simple magic of a shared meal, he had finally found the one thing he had been starving for all along. He was, at last, truly rich. Question for Act 5: how do you define a rich life, and has that definition changed for you over time? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more emotional and heart-touching stories that speak to the soul, and share your thoughts in the comments to tell us which story you want to hear next.